Good evening, everyone. With apologies for the delay in getting to this special board meeting. I would like to call this special meeting of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board to order, acknowledging that we are meeting from many locations in the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin Nation. And we thank the Algonquin people for hosting us on their land, especially in this beautiful season of the fall. Could I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Trustee Jenkins, seconded by Trustee Lyra. Is there any discussion on the agenda? I'll call the question then. All those in favor of the agenda as presented? And those opposed? And the agenda is carried. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, I would like to move to item 4 on our agenda then, and ask Vice Chair Penny for his report from Committee of the Whole in camera. Trustee Penny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the Committee of the Whole met in camera this evening, reports and recommends as follows. On a motion by Trustee Campbell, which I will second, that staff proceed as directed in board in camera with respect to a human resources matter.
Thank you, Trustee Penny. We have held our discussion in camera on that, and so I will ask if Manager Guthrie could please open the vote, unless she has set us up to deal with more than one recommendation in a single recorded vote.
I have not set it up that way, but I will open the vote.
In that case, we will just go ahead with this first vote.
And Manager Guthrie, I do not have my e-scribe with me, but I do vote in the affirmative.
Thank you, Trustee Penny.
I'm in the same situation as Trustee Penny, and I vote in the affirmative. This is Trustee Bell.
Thank you, Trustee Bell.
Manager Guthrie, it's Trustee Jenkins. I'm not seeing anything on my e-scribe, but I am voting in favor.
Thank you, Trustee Jenkins.
Trustee Campbell here, ditto both ways, not seeing anything, but in favor.
Through you, Madam Chair, not sure if Trustee Lyra or Trustee Schwartz, I can't see whether they are present in the meeting, but if they could indicate to me whether or not they are in favor, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I sent you a message. I think everybody's having e-scribe problems.
And I'm not seeing Trustee Schwartz in the meeting yet.
Yeah, she has not returned to the meeting as near as I can tell.
Okay.
And so we have a result. The motion is carried unanimously among those present, 10 in favor, none opposed, and no abstentions. Trustee Penny.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And one other item, and that is on a motion by Trustee Blackburn, which I will second, that staff proceed as directed in board in camera with respect to a human resources matter, and also with amendments as proposed by Superintendent McCoy.
Thank you for that. And again, I will ask Manager Guthrie if she could please open the vote.
And again, Manager Guthrie, no e-scribe, I vote in the affirmative.
Thank you, Trustee Penny.
Justine Bell here, voting in the affirmative.
Thank you, Trustee Bell.
Trustee Jenkins voting in favor as well.
And Campbell likewise.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. I see that Trustee Schwartz has joined the meeting. Not sure whether she has eScribe open. Sorry, Trustee Schwartz.
In terms of, I do have it open. Sorry, I had the wrong item open, Nicole. Just putting it in now.
Thank you.
And we have a result, and that is the motion is carried. 11 in favor, none opposed, and abstentions. Anything further, Trustee Penny?
That concludes my on-camera report this evening, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And that also concludes our agenda for this special board meeting. So I declare the meeting adjourned. And would you like to go directly into the committee of the whole public meeting?
Probably we have all the actors, everyone here, so let's do so.
Thank you.
All right, so I'd like to call the October 11th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. And I'd like to acknowledge that the meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin territories. And I'd like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their land. And I'd like to call for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Jenkins, thank you very much. Are there any changes to the agenda? And seeing none, I'd like to call a question on the agenda. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Moving on, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? And seeing none, if there is an item that comes up that there is a conflict of interest, please identify it and recuse yourself from commenting or voting on that, please. Next item, a briefing from the chair. Madam Chair.
Thank you. This evening, I'd like to begin with the fact that education labor negotiations are currently underway in Ontario. OCDSB employees are represented by two unions, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario and the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. Some of you may have read that the CUPE union announced the results of a strike vote of its education members. This union does not represent OCDSB employees, and any potential actions that are taken by CUPE will not affect OCDSB schools. The OCDSB values all of its employees and remains committed to good faith bargaining and fair and fully funded collective agreements which support student learning and well-being. While negotiations are underway, any significant updates will be shared with the community as necessary. Secondly, the OCDSB is seeking a community member with accounting, financial management, or other relevant business experience to join the Audit Committee. The primary role of the Audit Committee is to assist the Board of Trustees in fulfilling its duties related to governance and oversight. Qualified candidates are invited to submit a letter of interest and a resume by 1 p.m. on the 31st of October. More information can be found on our website. And finally, I'm very happy to share that 8 current and former OCDSB students will be honored this month at Youth Ottawa's 25th Annual RBC Spirit of the Capital Awards. These students will be recognized for their achievements in several categories, including arts and culture, academic perseverance, service and caring, and more. You can learn more about the award winners and ceremony on Youth Ottawa's website. And that concludes my briefing for this evening.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And are there any questions for the chair on her briefing? And seeing none, moving on, I'd like to call upon the director to provide a briefing. Madam Director.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The Diplôme d'études en langue française, or DELF, is an internationally recognized French proficiency test for persons whose first language is not French. The OCDSB offers DELF administrations to eligible students twice a year, once in the fall and once in the spring. More information for the fall administration has been emailed to eligible students. Congratulations to 3 OCDSB teachers who are being recognized for their work with the Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence and Teaching Excellence in STEM. The recipients of certificates of achievement are Marc Dubois, Osgood Township High School, Lisa Leviton from Vimy Ridge Public School, and Jen Talbot from John McCrae Secondary School. Thank you all for your hard work and your dedication to our students and student learning. Last week, the OCDSB launched its annual United Way campaign to raise funds for community initiatives to combat poverty, support youth, and help people to overcome challenges across the region. The campaign runs until November the 10th. OCDSB employees will engage in fundraising events and be offered the opportunity to donate to the United Way, the Education Foundation of Ottawa, or the registered charity of their choice. To make a donation or learn more, you can visit our website. In recognition of Media Literacy Week later this month, the OCDSB has partnered with the organization Media Smarts to offer a virtual workshop on October the 25th for parents and guardians. The session will cover managing kids' screen time, helping to keep children safe online, and setting household internet rules. On our website, you'll find more details about how to register. And that's all for my report. Trustee Penny.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And are there questions, or sorry, Madam Director, are there questions for the Director on her report? Trustee Bell.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair. Although it's not direct in the Director's report, I'm wondering if there have been any updates with regard to COVID protocols within the schools, given that children's hospitals are filling up quite fast right now and under significant pressures. Has Ottawa Public Health given any indication that we should be strengthening our measures at this time? Thank you very much.
Thank you, through you, Chair. That certainly has not been conveyed to us at this point, but I will turn to Associate Director Reynolds, who continues to be our conduit with public health. Associate Director Reynolds.
Thank you, through you, Chair. We did meet as the 4 school boards with OPH last Wednesday, as we do quite regularly. At that time, there was no indication of new recommendations forthcoming or even changes in the language of the existing recommendations. We have reissued signage to schools, so encouraging people to wear masks. We continue to put updates out on a weekly basis, most often containing information reminding folks around the use of the daily self-assessment, and the various recommendations that are contained within. So far, although we are seeing absentee rates in schools, we haven't had any schools observe anything unusual or felt that a report to IPAC, infection prevention and control, was required. So things are okay at the moment, but we'll continue that conversation with OPH in case they do suggest or think a change in direction is required, and then we'll update people accordingly.
Thank you very much for that update and for all the work that you're doing, Associate Director.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the director on her briefing? And seeing none, do we have any delegations this evening, Manager Guthrie?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have no delegations this evening.
Thank you very much. Then moving on in our agenda to item 8.1, report 22-059. Policy review update. I'd like to call upon the director to introduce that report. Just before that, Trustee Bell, was there an item that you wanted to bring? Okay, Madam Director.
Thank you, through you, Chair. This report certainly is reflective of, a path that has been undertaken of work that this Board of Trustees has engaged in terms of how it is that we reflect upon and move forward the role of trustees, governance role around policy development and maintenance. And certainly trustees were actively involved in that discussion earlier this year, and it certainly lent itself to some steps through direction to staff. And so we are pleased to be able to bring back some concrete thoughts and reflections on this. It does indicate matters for action. However, we do recognize that it ought to be identified as a matter for discussion. And I will turn it at this point to Executive Officer Giroux, who was our lead on this item, who will give some more complete context and set the direction for the discussion. So over to you, Executive Officer.
Thanks very much. And we're pleased to bring forward this update to the board. And we felt strong in our commitment to bring an update to you before we got to the end of the term. We started this review process with you, and you'll recall that we did in May bring some recommendations to you to revise the policy development and management policy, and wanted to let you know what work we've been doing since then, and also to honor the commitment to have a further conversation with you about a possible committee role for the Board of Trustees going forward. And as the director indicated, this was listed as an action item, and initially our thinking was that we would outline the three committee options and maybe make a recommendation to you or leave it open to you to decide. But as we drew nearer to putting the agenda together, we didn't really feel that we'd reached a point where we were confidently recommending any particular option. And that's possibly because we have so many pieces of this work underway. So I'd like to spend a few minutes just talking to you about what we have done, and then highlighting what the committee models could look like, and then open it up for discussion. And because of the way the item is placed on the agenda, if there was a member with a strong need or strong desire rather to put forward a recommendation tonight, there is a procedural mechanism that could allow for that. But I just say that for your reference. So in terms of what's happened since our last conversation, you recall that in May, when we made amendments to the policy, we created a 3-tier policy structure. And so from there, we started looking at how would we operationalize that. And we had not just a policy that governs our policy process, but also a procedure that sets out some of the work that happens behind the scenes. And in the course of our discussions, decided that we needed to do two things. One, we needed to update the procedure on policies and bring some operating standards to that. And two, we would need to separate out what the guidelines are for procedures and try and apply some of the thinking and learning that we did to the policy framework to the procedure framework, so that at the same time we were bringing efficiency to policies. We are also bringing efficiency to procedures. I would like to tell you that we have envisioned all of that, but what I can tell you is that this is slow and methodical work with a lot of conversation and a lot of what ifs and how about, and looking at cycles and frameworks. And so we are still working on those two documents. We have done a few things where we've made some significant progress. So we've been successful in recruiting a new policy analyst, and that's increased the policy of or the capacity of our policy team. So that's great. We have redesigned the policy template and have been testing that. And that was a really interesting exercise for us, both to test the template for how it works generally, but also to then apply the template and the tiered policy review cycle. So you will have seen in early September that we brought forward several policies that had housekeeping amendments, mostly in the governance area. And we chose the governance area because those are the policies that we are the subject matter leads on. And so we were able to go deep in those without having to draw on the organization at a time when people were really busy with end of year and over the summer. We've been doing quite a bit of work on the definitions as per the conversation we had and what that glossary of definitions looks like. We also been doing a lot of thinking about an equity framework, and we talk about that in this report as a subsequent initiative. We actually have started to model out a new equity framework. We're not quite at the point where we're ready to share that, but will in the near future be able to do that. And so part of our struggle in terms of where we're at was wanting to make sure we came back and had this conversation on committee structure. And so we looked at 3 different models, and one was to use the kind of informal policy working group that we were using last spring. And, you know, that kind of forum is good for several different things. It's a bit ad hoc in nature. And so it allows for flexibility and fluidity in terms of if a trustee is interested in a particular subject or a set of subjects, they're able to participate in the conversation without having to be engaged in a formal committee on an ongoing basis. And it might allow us to have more conversation and reach more consensus, a little bit more nimble. And so definitely a great working model for a lot of things. The other, the next option we looked at was a special purpose policy committee. And that would be a more regular, permanent kind of committee structure that would have guidance and oversight on the work plan. And a lot of thinking there about what would the structure of the agendas look like, and how would we make sure that that committee would manage the breadth of work rather than going, knee deep, waist deep on a policy by policy cycle, and getting us caught up in the work in a different kind of way. So lots of thinking about that. I think there are some ways to do that. And think for that special purpose policy development committee model to be successful, we would need to think about a committee structure that probably had at least 5 to 7 trustees represented on it, so that you'd have a good representation of perspective. And when they brought forward recommendations, those recommendations would be more likely to be successful going forward rather than rehashed and redebated. In that model, their recommendations would potentially go to committee of the whole. And the third option is to create a committee of the whole policy committee, similar to what we have with committee of the whole budget. And our thinking was that a committee of the whole policy committee, we might, as we look forward to going back to 2 committee of the whole meetings a month, we would privilege one of those to be policy focused and one of those to deal with the regular business as we've been doing for the last 2 years. And so I think you understand the advantage of the committee of the whole policy. All members would be on the committee and it would go directly from committee of the whole to board. And so some efficiency in that kind of conversation. There's quite a bit more detail elaborated on in the report itself among those 3 models. I don't think I need to go into all of that with you, just wanted to give you that overview. And also to say that companion to some of these things are changes to consultation and information that's available to the public about policy reviews and how we provide and frame and scope that. And the last thing I want to talk about before we open it up to questions is the resourcing piece of this. So we've increased our capacity for this work by adding a policy analyst, but we still have a significant amount of work. And most of the conversation we've had with the board has been around policies and not really touched on procedures. But with every policy we do, and a lot of policies have more than one procedure, we need to do corresponding updates to those. Sometimes we're even driven by the procedure first. So there are some workload implications, and that does affect, you know, our capacity to get at the work. What we've been working on with the senior team is a kind of model that gets into more of an annual workflow planning, where departments are thinking about what is the work in their portfolio for a particular year, and how does that relate to policy, and then identifying those policies which need major review, those which need more minor review, and those which need just housekeeping amendments, and also where are their new policy areas. And so work in all of these areas continues. And the last thing I will say about the resourcing piece is, as we move into a very large trustee orientation program over the next few months, our capacity to simultaneously run a very large policy review process starts to tighten up a little bit. And so we do need to be thoughtful about how we navigate some of those pieces of work, but fortunately have a very keen team behind this, and they have done remarkable work so far and will continue to carry us forward. So I'm going to pause there and invite any questions. And as I said, the purpose of this report tonight is not to make any formal decisions, but rather to solicit feedback from trustees and make sure that the political and administrative perspectives are aligned in terms of process.
Thank you very much, Executive Officer. And we do have a few trustees and members that wish to ask questions, starting with Trustee Bell.
Hello, everyone. It is bedtime, so you may hear some ruckus behind me. Thank you so much for the great work that has gone into developing these recommendations and trying to chart a way forward. My number one comment, I'm very grateful to hear that this is not going to be a moment for decision, given that we have 7 trustees that are not seeking re-election. And I think determining how we move forward with the policy process is best placed in the hands of the next elected board of trustees. I do, however, appreciate that it was brought back to the group that has brought it along this far. And I very much look forward to hearing my colleagues and what their thoughts are on what would be the most effective means to move forward. But just to reiterate, my hope is that this will be brought again to Committee of the Whole, potentially November 29th. So that would give our members of our advisory committee the opportunity to speak with the new board about what their thoughts are on what is the best policy process going forward. So thanks again to everyone for your work on this, and I look forward to discussing this and hearing from my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Trustee Bell. Moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Yes, thank you. And I quite concur with Trustee Bell. I think it'd be quite appropriate, given the number of incumbents seeking re-election, to place this decision firmly in the hands of the new board. And do appreciate the staff work and thoughtfulness around all this. I do have some questions, though, and perhaps suggestions for exploration. One is that in the report, staff do mention we're working on a procedure around policy. What is it? Development and coordination, something like that. Coordination and management. I forget what the title is. We do have, of course, a policy on policy too. And I guess what I was wondering, the board's role in policy and what policy should be, generally speaking, what policy isn't, and that kind of thing, how it's formed and what it should consider. Have staff started to look perhaps at potential modifications to the policy on policy as opposed to the procedure on policy?
So we did bring forward revisions to the policy on policies. That was what was updated in May. And what we've been trying to do is make the companion amendments to a procedure on policy where we can also capture some of those things that we talked about in those conversations with you that are more administrative in nature. And so, for example, there's some issues around numbering conventions and naming and those sorts of things and just assigning out that work. There is a little bit of thinking about the style pieces. And the style pieces would be appendixes to the procedure. So font size, serial commas, those kinds of things. So that it's the procedure is a place where you can go to understand how you get involved in the business of drafting and what the cycle of work is, more so than the directives.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. I do recognize that there's a lot of sort of housekeeping and integrative work was done with respect to the policy on policies, and I have it in front of me. I can see that work. However, for instance, just as a case in point, staff are working on definitions and common definitions, but in some or more our recent policy debates, the exact nature of the definitions and their use and intent and this kind of thing itself has been a subject of debate. So I guess the question would be, so to me, the policy on policy, I'm just using this example, policy on policy would define the scope, perhaps, of the Board of Trustees role with respect to policy development. Is it the review and adoption of policies? Does it extend to approving of common definitions? Et cetera, right? So, because that kind of thing is left unclear, I would say, in terms of the respective roles. So it's just a suggestion. I didn't see the changes to the policy on policy as being final, but at being sort of an evergreen document that would be almost necessarily reviewed as we potentially looked at other models.
I think
so, for instance. 3.6, for instance, says, staff will present to the board a list of policies scheduled for review, but in at least one of the scenarios, special purpose committee would be potentially the one proposing that, depending on what happened, right? So anyway.
Absolutely. There will be some companion changes as we work through this, and on the definitions themselves, I think I should clarify, because I may have used the wrong language, that I think what we're finding is we're working on a compendium of definitions so that there is a place with all definitions, and there will need to be some harmonizing of definitions, but the one definition for every policy kind of approach seems to be a little bit trickier to get at. And so sometimes we'll see, I was trying to think, we had a good example the other day of something that's defined somewhere and it maybe has two parts in the word. And we couldn't use that term. Oh, it was in the student trustee tier 1 changes we made. We couldn't use member of the board in the same way because in the student trustee regulation, it defines it differently. So you'll see that sometimes we'll get stuck there, which is why we're sort of at the compendium of definitions. So then we can review them and check against them as opposed to going singly to every policy.
Well, it's appreciated. I was just using that by way of an example.
I appreciate you.
But I do appreciate it. In the segue to my second question, which is, or just wanted to explore, in terms of the conveying report refers to the three general scenarios. Under the special purpose committee one, that was effectively the caution was provided in the oral gloss just now, that it would be important to guard against redebate. One possible mechanism would be to provide preference at subsequent org meetings to trustees who had not previously been members of the committee, which may or may not be one good way to do it. But it strikes me that that kind of decision as to where precedence should be or preference should be offered really is a board of trustees decision and not a procedural decision. I was sort of wondering if there would be a staff comment, and that's what I'm sort of getting. Like, to me, I think that maybe we need to look at some policy changes or board direction.
Right. I think as we, you know, I think that's the value of this conversation, is to get some insight into where people feel comfortable and where there is additional work to do. Whatever path we pick on a committee structure and on some of the other pieces, there will need to be ongoing amendments to the policy on policy. And I think that's what you're getting at. And as we sort of refine the process a little bit, we will need to bring a little bit more granularity to the who and the how in terms of authority and voice. I think what we do know from the review that we did is we have to make sure that we're redesigning the process in a way that is getting at sustainability, right? Because what we haven't experienced was a sustainable model. And so we need to make sure that we're not in that, you know, we're allowing the board more opportunity to engage in the policy process in some way, but at the same time, we're not sitting around a table drafting word by word, you know, or redrafting the 136 policies that we have. So
Fine balance. I heard a bell, Mr. Chair, so I assume my time is up. If I could be put back on the list, please.
Certainly can, Trustee Campbell. And thank you very much for recognizing that. Going on to Trustee Lyra.
Yeah, I'd like to open by thanking the staff for this report and process. I really like that we got a list of the things that are being considered without requiring us to make a decision immediately. That is something like the ability to discuss these kinds of things is something I have requested in the past, and I wanted to commend staff for providing that to us. So I have a couple of thoughts and then a question. Of the three presented, I am fond of the committee of the whole policy. I recognize the concern that a majority of voting members might be uninterested in a particular policy or subset of policies being discussed. Is there any ability to lower quorum?
That's the question. We could take a look at that. I don't think I could speak to off the cuff how we would do that, but we could take a look at that.
Okay. That is one of the things I would like to consider would be maybe we set quorum at the chair of the committee and any two, because I think that there will be discussions that all 12 trustees will want to weigh in on, and I don't want to just rehash everything at one cow and then at the next cow, because only 5 to 7 of the board members were present and the other 5 to 7 have strong feelings about the policies that were discussed and they didn't get the opportunity. And so I do, of these three, I am most fond of committee of the whole policy. I will echo comments by Trustee Campbell and Trustee Bell that I feel like this decision should be handed to the next board. We might get 12 policy wonks who all definitely want to sit on committee of the whole policy, and we might get 12 people who are not interested in policy so much, and they would just want a policy working group. And so I think that decision should be rightfully in the hands of the future board. I did have another question, and that was about 8 meetings per year. Was that proposed? Is that set in stone?
It's proposed and proposed for two reasons. Again, if we're going to have a model that's workable, we need to figure out ways that we can get through an agenda. And so, you know, when I talked about some of the thinking pieces, some of the thinking pieces are, you know, maybe there's a report back on the housekeeping tier 1 amendments, but that's just there for information. It's not intended to be a discussion item. You know, there's maybe a discussion about a work plan at the start of the year and an update on some things, but we're not getting into in every policy, you know, a 1-hour conversation about how are we going to consult on it, and a, you know, 3-meeting conversation about what is the content of it, because we're not resourced that way. You know, I talk about adding 1 policy analyst, but we've got, what did we establish, 350 odd policies and procedures to get through. So finding the balance, and we also need to make sure that we have a reasonable cycle between when we meet and when we can come back and do work. So the good thing about a special purpose committee is, you know, there might sometimes be the capacity to say, okay, we're going to revisit the work plan. It's not 8 meetings over the course of the year. You know, we need 3 meetings between October 15th and December 1st because we're working on something, and then we'll come back in the end of January or something like that. It might be a little bit more fluid that way versus the committee of the whole structure, but those are pieces we need to sort of think out a little bit. And that also might evolve over time.
Something to consider is that most trustees, oh, well, I'll speak for myself. As a trustee, I book off every Tuesday because that is frequently when our trainings happen. That is frequently when our meetings are scheduled. If we have to have an extra meeting one, it's almost always on Tuesdays. I find it much easier to just book all the Tuesdays than to try and piecemeal in other pieces. And so for my scheduling and presumably other trustees' scheduling, it is easier if we have a nice regular schedule for the committee of the whole policy versus, as you put it, trying to put 3 meetings between November 15th and December 1st.
Right. And I don't think committee of the whole policy lends itself to that kind of nature. Sorry, I just meant only a special purpose committee where it's a bit smaller. So some of the advantages of a different size committee, but absolutely agree with you. Scheduling is key. For everybody.
The other reason that I am most fond of committee of the whole policy is it does allow our non-voting members, it allows our union representatives and our committee chairs to give input into the policies that we're going to be discussing. And I think it's really valuable. We ask these people to volunteer their time and they provide expertise that we may or may not have. And I think it's really important to make sure that we hear that voice. And if we don't have it scheduled in a committee of the whole format, I don't know how we're going to be able to reach out to all of these disparate groups and make sure that we are getting the level of engagement that I think is really important. And I'm wondering if there's a comment or a halfway point or something that I have missed in the other 2 models.
You have captured one of the very reasons why we're not finished our thinking on this work.
Okay. One more thing that I had noticed is in the table in Appendix A, under reporting, you have the middle column and the Special Purpose Committee at the top says make recommendations to Committee of the Whole, and at the bottom it says make recommendations to Board. I'm wondering if there's an inconsistency or a typo between those 2?
It's probably a typo. The initial thinking is that it would go to Committee of the Whole. I mean, you could have a special purpose committee and you could go, or you could report either way, right? That's the decision of the board. And, you know, one factor that might influence that is whether you went with a 5-person or a 7-person or some other number, but you see what I mean? The number of members who participate in that might drive where it reports to. What you want to look at is making sure that the number of people and voices and where you report to have some balance there. So I would say that at the 5 to 7 model, definitely at 5, I would see it reporting to Committee of the Whole.
Okay. I am out of time. But I will hop back on the list.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lyra. And going to Lily Miller.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I was very interested in the, I can't remember what it's called it, equity lens framework for the for looking at policies, and that you're developing that. And I would like to know who's leading that. Particularly, do you have the minoritized representatives there leading the work, or are they consulted, or what's the process for that? Thanks.
So right now, what we've been doing is looking at best practices in looking at equity frameworks. So where are there organizations that have assessment tools? And then trying to understand how some of those models relate to our kind of policy review model, because it's very different, for example, the way we work and approve policies than a federal department, et cetera. So in large part, best practice review and trying to build a framework that we could then use to have conversations with our advisory committees, our human rights and equity advisor, and some other third-party experts. In terms of who is leading it right now, it is the staff on the policy review team that are doing the preliminary research. And yes, they are representative of different groups, not every group, but there are some different lived experiences and voices there. And when we get that to a stage that we're, confident that it's at least workable and ready for discussion, we'll come up with a plan for further conversation about that and invite input. But at least we're trying to build a model for a presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just listening into the conversation from previous speakers, I think, as an outgoing trustee, I would agree entirely with the perspective that any decision be taken by the future Board of Trustees. But as a trustee who served for 2 terms, I've seen lots of policy discussion around this table. And my preferred model, for what it's worth, would be the Special Purpose Committee. I think we've heard multiple times from colleagues that part of the committee of the whole process, or even board process, doesn't really allow for fluid discussion because it's constrained by those committee rules. And I think we would, from the perspective of allowing for a free-flowing, open conversation, finding ways to achieve consensus, even if you have a smaller group, presumably having a majority of members of the Board of Trustees, you will get different perspectives, and you'll still have an opportunity to discuss either at a committee of the whole or board, of which we also have non-voting members in attendance. And I think as long as there is a proper consultation process that's established with our non-voting members and with the various groups that we do have around the table during Committee of the Whole, as well as Committee of the Whole budget and so forth, I think we'll still be able to then have appropriate discussions and probably more free-flowing conversations, particularly around policy areas that can be divisive in their very nature. And so I think, based on the experience over the past couple of years in particular, I think we do need to find a different process. I think just having the idea of a policy working group is probably not sufficient because it's too flexible, too open-ended. And I would say that from this perspective as well, with staff support, bearing in mind, trustees get tired and burnt out. We have a staff who equally have to staff these meetings and sit through a long conversations. So I think finding kind of a happy place kind of in the middle might be the appropriate path forward. And lastly, I'll just say, with a new board coming in, with many of the trustees not having served before, I think it will be vital that there is an opportunity for discussion, because committee of the whole simply won't allow for that. So I just wanted to offer those thoughts.
Thank you very much, Trustee Schwartz. And I did see Trustee Huff with her hand up. Did you want to add to the discussion, Trustee Huff?
Yeah, I'll jump in just shortly. I apologize. I'm not feeling very well this evening, gang. Trustee Schwartz captured very nicely exactly what I was going to say, was this middle position somewhere between having, a non-standing type of committee or something happening on set schedule with at the committee of the whole, that it's that middle position that might be the richest place because of the ability to have a structure of discussion that actually is much more rich and thought-inducing at that stage. So that was my thinking. And I would also, I would add just one piece that is contrary to what people have been thinking. And I remember when we were about to come on board here as the new board, we had just hired, or we're in the process of hiring, a new director at that time. And there was a certain amount of consideration of what the role of the incoming trustees would play, and what the role of the past board would be. And there is a lot of role for discussion here amongst this group of people based on the experience that we bring to this conversation, in terms of deciding what is a really meaningful and appropriate way to move forward. If we're replacing the majority of this board, we will be bringing in a number of people with various different levels of experience that may or may not allow them to come to a meaningful understanding and a meaningful decision on this very important question very early in their mandate. So I'm not sure, I think I may stand contrary to my colleagues on that discussion. And that I will stop before the bell tonight. Don't have a lot of voice. Don't have a lot of voice.
Thank you very much, Trustee Huff. Hope you're feeling better soon. And moving on to Ima Lamba.
I have a question first. Does the second one, the special purpose committee, does it have to be structured that there are no non-voting members of COW on it, or can that be changed?
It doesn't have to be structured so that there are no non-voting reps on it. I think the challenge with the special purpose committee is how to keep it small and not recreate the size. So, but there are various options and things that could be examined, but definitely we need to figure out how to take advantage of what it is as something smaller, right? So some thinking could be done there.
Okay, so that can be modified, because I really do think the committee of the whole, the way we've been doing meetings as a representative of ACE and as a non-voting representative, it was very difficult to bring sort of that perspective, because we're not allowed to make motions, we're not allowed to do this and this and that. There's very rigid structured rules, and then those meetings on the policies took a very long time because people had to make motions to make amendments. So for me, that's not a very productive way of looking at policies. In fact, you end up having a mediocre policy because people are just trying to get through their motions, right? I just didn't think the discussions could have been as rich if those rules weren't as there, since I've done many policy reviews. So I would think that the second one, where there would be non-voting members that may have the expertise around it, and it doesn't have to be large, but to be there where there can be sort of an open discussion. I think that's really important and conducive to having it. The other point I just wanted to make was around the procedures and processes. Would this committee, I know you mentioned it, there's policies and then there's procedures, you know, or guidelines attached to it. Would this committee also then be overseeing that part of it too? So
That's not the intent. Responsibility for procedures is generally assigned to the director. And so the goal is not to change that reporting structure and have those also go before either a special purpose committee or a board. The volume of work is too much, but also the procedures ideally have a little bit more fluidity and capacity to get updated in a timely way. That's not to say that there isn't often consultation around procedure development. And one of the things I think that is most important is when there's a larger policy review, a lot of the feedback informs the procedures. And so there is some conversation there about some elements of it, but it's not intended that procedures would come to either a special and to any of these models.
Okay. I actually do think procedures are important because policies are just general broad strokes, you know, and when they're broad strokes, they can be interpreted differently, even if there was a discussion about it at the committee of the whole or wherever it was. And I have seen people not like interpreting it differently than what was the intent in the procedure.
Absolutely right. And that's the challenge of balancing the political and administrative, and that's the responsibility that the board vests in the director of education in doing that. And so absolutely understand that challenge. And I think a lot of work goes into trying to make sure that we respect that division and take that direction from the board very seriously in aligning any procedures.
Okay,
so thank you.
Yeah, and just my last comment. I've got a little bit of time. Just my last comment would be if you're going to have non-voting representatives, obviously they're representing the constituency that they're from. Like I would be for the ACE committee, and so it would be important for me to ensure that in any of these processes in these committees that there's opportunity for people that are sitting on there, like trustees too, that they do their consultations, but also the non-voting members have the opportunity to go back and consult their groups, because sometimes we've seen policies come up and we've only had like less than 4 or 5 days to actually review it, consult and get that. So it'd be nice to kind of think about that in the process too, who's sitting on it and what are they bringing, their expertise for sure. But if they're, you know, also bringing perspectives of their committee or their constituency. That was it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks. And you raise an important challenge there. In looking at the models, one of the reasons, you know, you asked about non-voting reps on a special purpose committee, and one of the things that we have to be thoughtful about is, I talked about size of a special purpose committee. If all of the non-voting reps were added to that committee, in fact, I think they would outnumber then the number of trustees we were talking about, but also not just the role that they play. And you raise an important issue about their liaison responsibility with their committee or their representative role with their committee. Because remember, we are also trying to bring efficiency and sustainability to this process. But the other piece that we can't underestimate is the demand that places on those advisory committees to appoint someone. And it need not, you know, if the board were to contemplate a special purpose committee that had non-voting reps on it, it need not necessarily be the same person who is the rep to Cow. And so that's something that would have to be thought out. But, you know, the goal in all of these processes is to make sure that advisory committees have the opportunity and capacity to advise the board on certain issues, but it is not the expectation that an advisory committee member is burdened with all of the same responsibilities as a trustee, because they certainly didn't sign up for that. So those are some of the things we need to think about when we talk about sustainability, because one of the other trustees talked about the amount of work it is with every night you add and how that process works. So lots of good thinking there for us to continue to reflect and try and find a workable model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And going to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, and thanks again to staff for a very thorough report. I especially appreciated the appendix because it sets things out overall quite clearly. If we're talking about preferences, I think my personal preference in some ways is very much along the lines of the working group approach. And one of the reasons for that is that if you're going to do good policy development and have good input, you need people who are both interested and have some knowledge or understanding to bring to bear on the subject. One of the problems is that people have particular interests and particular expertise, and that applies just as much to advisory committee members and members of our federations as it does to trustees. And the people we really need to hear from, at least in the early stages of policy development, are people who can actually bring a knowledgeable contribution to the discussion. That means that if you have a policy committee that is looking in a single meeting at several different policies, you might actually need to have different people from the advisory committees to bring the necessary knowledge, because one individual from an advisory committee may not have the interest or the background to contribute on all of the policies that are under consideration at that meeting. And the same applies to the concept of a committee of the whole for policy, that if you stick with a single representative per advisory committee for each meeting, that then could eliminate the opportunity for advisory committees to send the people who were the ones who were most interested and could contribute the most to that particular discussion. I don't think that any of these models is quite ripe yet for use, but I do think that we need to look closely at ways to keep it managed and to make sure that we have that interest and expertise at the table when we are holding the earlier discussions on policies. But we also have to make sure that we hear from the people who are impacted by the policies, who may not at the beginning be all that interested or all that knowledgeable, but they certainly have a lot at stake if we adopt a policy that is going to affect what happens to their children, what happens to their community groups, and so on. So I think that certainly we need to put more thought into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Scott, did you wish to go back on the list or? No? Okay. Going to...
I'll decide later if I want to put my hand up again.
Okay. Going to Stephanie Kirky.
Thank you, Chair. I guess from a position as a non-voting representative at Cal, I'm looking to ensure that those voices are still heard with whatever option is selected. I do think there might be room in the policy working group option to open up more opportunity for non-voting representatives to participate and to have voice. Certainly echoing some of what Seema's comments were around the importance of ensuring those voices are heard. And while the cow option is more democratic and unwieldy, more democracy sort of requires, it's more work and it's more unwieldy, but it does allow for more voices at the table. And I would hope that whatever option, that there would be opportunity for the non-voting representatives around the table to have some input.
Thank you very much. Moving on to, are you finished, Ms. Kirk? Thank you very much. Moving on to Suzanne Lyon.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to echo some of the comments made by previous speakers, in particular Seema and Stephanie, who just spoke. I also very much appreciated Trustee Lyra's comments at the beginning of this discussion and Trustee Scott's comments just now. I think that, you know, the middle option, the special purpose group, does not allow, the way it's described in the documents now, for participation by non-voting members, which is a concern, because for me, it means that certain perspectives and views are not going to be presented in that option, much as Trustee Scott was just mentioning. This is, you know, these are many policy discussions that parents and other stakeholders feel very strongly about and want to have a voice in. We also have a need to go back and consult people in our committees, and mindful of the fact that we don't necessarily need to be redoing the work of board staff when we are consulting our members of our committees. In my case, the Parent Involvement Committee, we tend to be a group of people who are pretty interested in policy. We self-select, you know, because we're interested in these things and we want to be involved in discussions, and we're volunteering our time. We have very diverse views in our committee. And so I think that representation of many views, even though it would take longer and discussions might be more difficult, would result in a more rigorous policy in the end, more rigorous products that reflect the views and needs more appropriately of your constituency. I think that, you know, rich and thought-inducing discussion can happen in a larger group. It doesn't have to be a 5 or 7 person committee. And I think it's very important that when you're discussing policy, that as many voices as possible are at the table. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, and I'd like to thank all the members of the committee. I think this is a very rich and vibrant discussion, and, you know, in my view, there's pros and cons to all the options that have been presented, and maybe we come up with a hybrid that brings them all together. But I would say that one of the main reasons, one of the main drivers of us going to committee of the whole versus having, we used to have a human resources committee, an education policy committee. We had various committees, and the reason why one of the main drivers we went to committee of the whole was because recommendations would come out of the committee, and the committee, like I sat on committees when I wasn't a trustee, so as a parent rep, so there was parent representation, there was various different kinds of representation, our federations were there, etc. So we've always, and I hope that obviously we would continue in that vein to keep as many voices that we hear. But one of the reasons we moved away from that is because on each of those committees, there was only a few trustees. So recommendations would come out of those committees, and then the board would just re-debate the whole thing. So with committee of the whole, with all the trustees present and our partners, then all the trustees are there. So when it gets to board, it shouldn't be a long-winded debate. That doesn't always work out that way, but that's in theory how it should work. So I think if we were going to have a special purpose committee, and I'm not wedded to any one particular thing now, but if we were going to have a special purpose committee, I think it would be imperative that we had at least 6 trustees present. And I also would put forward the notion that the trustee representation reflect the urban, suburban, rural nature of our district, because our constituencies are very varied, and so I think that there would have to be some balance on that committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Trustee Blackburn. And we're going to our second time list, starting with Trustee Campbell.
Oops, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just some additional thoughts. Similar to some of the speakers, I think in a sense, any of the models could work. I guess the question to me is, what are we trying to achieve here? And it seems to me that some of the impetus for this consideration is to unburden perhaps the body of all trustees from quote unquote interminable meetings, all kinds of last minute scheduled meetings because things go over time and we need to reschedule this and that meeting and that kind of thing. A new structure may be good medicine. There may be other things that we should be looking at. Some of the thoughts already suggested are similar to some of mine, is really taking a good hard look at timelines and an ability to consult and reflect. One of the which is not necessarily a structural thing. Another thing that I've been pushing for fairly consistently, but which is something a special purpose committee might be able to achieve, or which staff perhaps could do on their own, is to provide a companion rationale document as to why certain clauses read the way they do. Because in my experience, an awful lot of the debate and questions which occur take up time as well, go to, well, why this language, not that language? And did you consider this? And did you consider that? And I prefer this, I prefer that. And where did you get this language from? And if that is not set out in a companion document, I mean, that's the way the debate goes. So, but again, that's not necessarily a structural consideration. It's a practice consideration, perhaps. To me, and not to necessarily seek to promote it, but it is the most intriguing. But the structure on offer, which broad strokes minus the details, which can be very important, is of greatest interest to me is the special purpose one. And that's because the working group proposal is sort of, in a sense, what we've had in the past. This past year, indeed, staff established something similar for in forums and open discussions with stakeholders, had some of those opportunities. And so that would be sort of regularizing that format, but it's nothing terribly new. Committee of the whole is nothing terribly new. It's simply allocating time, maybe on one night, maybe across two, more time for policy discussion at committee of the whole. So to me, those may be workable, but they're not necessarily novel. I do recall when staff presented what the Toronto board did, is they have, as many boards in my own research do have a policy committee of one kind or other. Is they made it multi-tiered. It wasn't either or, right? There was an equity group filter, and basically things didn't even get to the policy committee until effectively the equity folks with community reps had green lighted it, right? I'll just finish, and I won't go on about a third time, Mr. Chair, very quickly, a couple of sentences. I think there are a lot of details, right? Should members be appointed for like alternating, maybe some are appointed for 2 years, some 1 year? Do you report to committee of the whole? Do you report to board? What's the frequency of the meeting? What exactly is the R&R mandate of the special purpose committee versus other things? And can you have more than one structure simultaneously? I think there's just a lot of options to be thought through, and we probably further discussion exactly what we're trying to do here and to improve. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. Moving on to Trustee Lyra for second time speaker.
Yeah. So these are sort of some thoughts I didn't get to the first time around. In the world in which I'd like to see the next board live, which is what I'm going to hope this builds towards. I would love it, and it's probably not feasible for this year, but I would love it if at the beginning of the school year, we said we have these 8 meetings or these 9 meetings or these 10 meetings. Here is what we're going to discuss at each one of them. You have 10 months notice. You have a 10-month plan to say, here's the policies we intend to review and when we intend to review them. Because that means that you can have things on the horizon, that the committees that we have can have time to discuss them, that the community, if they're interested, can be engaged. And if we were to have that nice long-term planning, then I don't know if we necessarily need to appoint a specific member from each committee, so much from each committee or non-voting partner. But we could just say, you have one seat at the table. You can send whoever you like to each of these meetings, provided that person is willing to represent the views of the group. Because if let's take SEAC, for example. If the representative from SEAC, who is the autism representative, has strong feelings about an autism policy that's happening in 3 months, they can gather feedback from SEAC and then bring that forward with a level of understanding and detail that just a regular appointed member wouldn't have. And so I don't necessarily think we need to specifically designate a person so much as we need to designate a seat and say the person from this committee is welcome, and it can be a different person every month. And so the model that I see that lends itself best to that world that I envision with long-term planning is the committee of the whole model. I've also heard what my colleagues have said about rehashing discussions. I believe it was Trustee Blackburn who mentioned that we don't want to return to the days of having a discussion and then bringing it forward and then having exactly the same discussion or having the same arguments over again. And I think the model that lends itself least likely to that rehashing of discussions is the committee of the whole model. That's all I had to say. I want to again thank staff for allowing us to have this discussion without a specific recommendation on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Scott.
Thank you. Just 3 things. Within the working group model, which talks about reporting via a letter of transmittal to the committee of the whole or policy with input or comments. I think one of the challenges with the working group concept is that there needs to be a better recording mechanism than that, so that the scope and content of the ideas floated by any working group were more fully captured than they would be just in a letter of transmittal. So that's one thing. Second thing is in terms of the number of seats and advisory committees and so on. Yes, I agree with Trustee Lyra that it would be useful for advisory committees and federations to be able to send whatever representative was going to be most appropriate for the topics on an agenda, and that should be up to the those committees to decide. However, having a plan for the whole year, I'm not sure is terribly practical because unforeseen things do happen. Certainly, we've had situations where external factors have really impacted our ability to get on with the plan that we already had in place. And we've also had situations where even trustee motions that have come forward that weren't part of our original work plan have derailed our attention and made it more difficult to do some of the other things that we actually already had on our work plans. So there are enough unknowns that happen during any school year that having a plan and really being able to stick to it doesn't frankly always work. And the last thing is just in terms of the history, back before we went to the committee of the whole model, while there were only a few trustees on each of the special purpose standing committees, all were still able to attend and meetings. So and even with that, even when you had seven trustees out of 12 or 8 trustees out of 12 instead of the 3 or 4 who were the actual committee members present at those meetings, it still got rehashed again at board. And I think that's something that's not going to be cured by a policy. It is going to be cured by trustees being able to exercise a little more discipline in terms of when and how and to what extent to raise particular concerns.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And Trustee Lyra, did you have your hand up to speak again?
I did. I wanted to respond to something Trustee Scott said, but I'll be quick. So I recognize, how do I want to phrase this? So I recognize that there's no one else on the list, is there?
No, there isn't, but I did want to add a little bit of my perspective after you're finished, Trustee Lyra. So
you go ahead, I'll put my thoughts together and then we can come back to me.
Okay. So here's some of my thoughts. Take them for what you wish, but you know, being involved in sort of running the Committee of the Whole for a few years, I think I have a bit of a perspective on some of this stuff, and I can see that Executive Officer and her staff have put a lot of work into this, which is good. I think the challenge is not necessarily with, although I do agree, more participation by different groups is valuable. The challenge will be in managing the culture of the group, because at the end of the day, policies have to emerge from the group. And, you know, given the history of where we have been as a Committee of the Whole, I can see that it is sometimes very challenging because you have members that have very divergent interests. Some are interested in the big picture, some are interested in commas. And it is, in order to manage that, it's extremely challenging. And the only way I think to do it is to ensure that the culture of the group is one of, let's produce a policy at the end of the day, because that is the way that our organization is governed. And you know, to that, the challenge also will be to ensure that the policy Committee of the Whole group sticks to policy, which I would say that is the main challenge, because I can see that the conversation will be also very divergent with regards to that, and it will be a severe challenge to keep it on track. Anyway, those are my comments, and I guess we're moving on to Trustee Lyra. Are you ready, or should I move on to Trustee Campbell?
Yeah, I got them together.
Okay, go ahead, Trustee Lyra.
So Trustee Scott was talking about long-term planning and interruptions, and those things happen. I guess in this world that I have envisioned, the interruptions or the ministry requirements would be put on the other Committee of the Whole agenda. So if the ministry comes out and says, you've got to update your concussion management policy again, that would go onto the regular Committee of the Whole and not interrupt or change the long-term planning trajectory of the Committee of the Whole policy. Yes, it would be a policy being dealt with at the other Committee of the Whole, but that's because it was required of us. And that would allow us to have this long-term plan for the whole year, because one of the things we have failed to do is cyclical policy review. And I think if we set out at the beginning of the year and say, we're going to handle these 6 policies per meeting across the whole year, that will let us conduct meaningful cyclical policy review, which I think is one of the goals that we have set out by attempting to review this. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. And Trustee Campbell?
Thank you. Last minute thoughts I meant to mention last time. I'll be very quick. Thank you. And that is, though obviously they've spoken eloquently for themselves, in terms of the non-voting representation, it's my perception and voice. It's my perception that people don't just want to be involved, and quite understandably, at the input stage at the beginning, which sort of a general discussion, and then you know, people would go away, do their thing, and draft something, and then hand it upwards and forwards. They also want to be involved, quite understandably, towards the back end, to interrogate and perhaps seek to improve penultimate language before it gets approved. And I think that's an important consideration. again, I think that any of these models, perhaps in conjunction with each other, maybe more, more than just one of them, could be engineered to provide for that. But I do think that that is an important consideration. And I just wanted to mention that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And seeing that we have no further contributors to this very extremely rich and valuable discussion, I'd like to thank everyone. And I'd like to thank Executive Officer Drew for bringing that forward. It's one of the best discussions we've had, so far this year. And it's, I'm sure that you got some valuable information out of that. And so moving on in our agenda to 9.1, Audit Committee. I'd like to call for a mover to receive the report from the Audit Committee dated September 22nd, 2022. Trustee Lara, thank you very much. And are there any errors and omissions? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on receipt of the report. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Are there any recommendations from the Audit Committee report? Trustee Lyra, are there any recommendations in there?
There is.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
I've lost my place, one moment. The Audit Committee has met and recommends as follows: that the board approve the external auditor's plan for the 2021-2020 school year, for the 2021-2022 year-end audit.
All right, since this committee doesn't need a second, is there any discussion on that, or do you have any opening comments on that motion, Trustee Lara?
The Audit Committee has met. We thought the external auditor's plan was reasonable. We voted to approve it. I'm sure you have all read it.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that motion was moved in Audit Committee by Trustee Fisher, who I think probably should remain as the mover if he's still here. Is he still with us?
I do not see him.
So we would need another mover then to substitute for Trustee Fisher.
Which would be Trustee Lara.
Fine.
A substitution. All right. Any discussion on that motion? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that motion. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Is there any additional recommendations in that report, Trustee Lyra?
There were not.
Thank you very much. Moving on then in our agenda to 9.2, Advisory Committee on Equity. I'd like to call for a mover to receive the report from the Advisory Committee on Equity of March 24th, 2022. Trustee Campbell moved. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on receipt. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you. I'd like to call for a mover to receive the Advisory Committee on Equity report of June the 9th, 2022. Trustee Lyra, thank you. Any errors and or omissions? Seema?
Yeah, I don't know if it's an error or omission. But I normally don't speak up on the ACE minutes at all. But I just wanted to note that that particular meeting, it was our last ACE meeting, and it was a bit challenging. And it left ACE members uncomfortable by the end of it. And it's not fully reflected in the minutes. And it was just how some people were sort of, the way people were talking and saying things and challenging things, that some that were on the ACE at that meeting, including myself, thought was very inappropriate and aggressive. And it's not quite reflected in there. I'm not getting into the details of those incidences, but I just wanted to note at some point, maybe there should be a discussion as to who outside of this space that's supposed to be somewhat safe for the ACE members to be able to talk about things, who should be included in that space, and who shouldn't be, and what happens if there is aggressive incident there that's outside of the ACE membership. I just wanted to bring that up. I just felt it was important to, it may not need to be reflected in the minutes, but to at least to acknowledge that, because there was ACE members who really felt very upset by that meeting. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Executive Officer how that can possibly be reflected in the mood of the meeting, and also the concern of SEMA. How can we address that, Executive Officer?
Well, I think that we can note the comments that Ms. Lamba has brought to this meeting. And, I hear the concern raised, and the struggle with minutes is that they're a summary of decisions. And we like very much to have minutes capture all of the conversation. And we particularly like it to capture he said, she said. But the further we go down the path of doing that, the further we move away from the purpose, which is to capture decisions. I think, if we were applying a purist governance framework, and in fact our own policies to this kind of situation, Ms. Lamba has asked a bigger governance question about participation and engagement. She's raised a question about culture, but also there is an issue about the role of the chair of a committee and dealing with issues as they arise during the meeting, right? And our own policies and code of conduct talk about that. And what that says to me is, it speaks to the need for more chair training. And we did have a meeting with all of our advisory committee chairs at the start of this year to sort of build a relationship. Unfortunately, ACE wasn't able to be represented at that. But we do have to build that capacity, because when we look at issues like codes of conduct, they make very clear that dealing with situations in the moment and establishing rules of procedure are what get at some of those, avoiding some of those less comfortable situations. So I say all of that in terms of the governance theory and what our rules are. That doesn't make it easy in practice, which is why I think in part a little bit more chair training helps, as does a commitment to culture and where you want to go with culture, right? And it's some of the things that you talked about. And as we look forward and we are looking at orientation with a new board of trustees, and for all of our advisory committees, new members there's definitely opportunities for us to work together to try and build that culture of care and respect. And ensure that, those meetings allow people to express opinions and exchange ideas, but not to be hurtful to those who are participating. So we'll carry that forward and see what can be done there to support that.
Okay, and in the interests of trying to stick on the agenda, I am going to if Ms. Miller and Ms. Lamba have something to add very briefly that is pertinent to that particular meeting, you can comment, but try to keep it to the subject matter. So Ms. Miller.
You probably didn't know what happened, but I take great exception to your, which is why, you know, I'm a little bit upset about your response and saying that the chair needs more training, and it's kind of like blaming the victim, because we were not just the chair. We all were subject to some horrible treatment by a trustee at that meeting. It was horrible. And the insinuations made were horrible. So it might not be the chair needs training. It might be the trustees. And, you know, the new trustees coming in, they may need training too. So yeah, I just had to, I understand what you're saying, but it's a little bit sounded like, you know, because I was there, sounded a little bit like victim blaming.
My apologies. It was not my intent to suggest that at all, but rather that there are some structures there, but and not speaking to, I was not at the meeting, so I can't speak to what was said at the meeting. And I'm sorry that there were people who were hurt in that conversation. And I absolutely agree that chairing the meeting is a challenging task, and it's one task, but all of the people in the meeting have to agree to a standard of behavior, which is why I was trying to bring a bigger governance framework. But certainly I hear your concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lamba?
Yeah, my comment will be very brief, just building on Lily's. It's about power dynamics too, right? So that has to be taken into consideration of the voluntary ACE members, whether that's the chair or just members, and who else is on at that meeting and when they're at it. And I think that was part of an issue that was going on too. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Campbell, anything to add?
Sorry, very briefly, as someone who was present, as a trustee who was present, I believe that one of and this is my take, one of the committee's concerns, I believe is expressed by the chair, but also other members present, was that they really did want the committee meeting to be a safe space, an accepting space, and make decisions by consensus. Indeed, there was some talk about eschewing, you know, colonial structures and colonial, quote unquote, you know, code of conduct kinds of processes. And so in that context, what do you do if effectively, from their perspective, an individual decides not to follow a collaborative consensual model that's preferred? I know that IAC, or my understanding is that IAC proceeds by invitation to its meetings, and perhaps ACE could consider proposing mandate changes along those lines to the forthcoming board. It's just an idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for your comments, everyone. I'm certain that executive officer is taking them into account. So moving on in our agenda to 9.4, Parent Involvement Committee of May 11th, 2022. I'd like to call for a mover to receive that report. Trustee Campbell, thank you very much. And before we talk about any errors or omissions, I believe Ms. Line just has some comments with regards to the meeting or the minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, I would like to pass on just a couple of comments from the chair of the Parent Involvement Committee. She has asked me to transmit to you that we have had low attendance at PIC meetings over the course of the year. One of the reasons is work-life balance. PIC will be reviewing new applications for PIC membership this fall. We have started to reach out this summer to parents with an email to parent councils and to parents directly. A copy is on the OCDSB website, and more outreach will occur throughout the school year and during the parent conference in November. We have predetermined our PIC meetings, which there was one on September 21st, October 19th, November 23rd, January 18th, February 22nd, April 12th, and May 10th. I also wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you very much to all of the trustees that I have had the pleasure of meeting with in these committee of the whole meetings and other contexts over the past year and a half that I've been involved. I think that all of you are very hardworking. You share the same goals of improving the school and educational experience for children in the OCDSB and for their families. And while you might disagree on how to get there, I think you all have the same intent, good intent. And I wanted to say thank you on behalf of the Parent Involvement Committee to those that we might be seeing at this meeting for the last time, and wish those of you who are running good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And are there any errors and or omissions to that report? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that report. All those in favor of receiving it? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. 9.5, Indigenous Education Council of May 19th, 2022. I'd like to call for a mover to receive that report. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that. All those in favor of receipt? And opposed? And that passes. Special Education Advisory Committee of June the 1st, 2022. Call for a mover to receive the report. Trustee Lyra, thank you. Any errors and or omissions to that report? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on receipt. All those in favor? And opposed? Passes. Thank you very much. Finally, Special Education Advisory Committee of September 14th, 2022. I'd like to call for a mover to receive the report. Trustee Boothby, thank you very much. Any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that. All those in favor? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Moving on to in our agenda report 22-069, strategic plan update. I'd like to call upon the director to introduce that report.
Thank you, through you, Chair. This is a report that is certainly a reflection of a lot of heart and minds come together to share with the Board of Trustees, as with the public, where we have come this past year 3 of a 4-year strategic plan. Capturing outcomes certainly reflects a landing place, although we're not quite landed yet. We are in the 22-23 school year, going into the final year of the strategic plan. Before we bring our team on to share with you highlights from the report, I'd like to just express thanks to the leadership of Executive Officer Giroux, Manager Rahim, and the Reid team for a lot of the background work and the leadership in pulling together much divergent thinking. But I have to ensure that there is a reflection of appreciation for the work of the trustees, because this, after all, is a reflection of where we've landed as a result of the direction that you have set. And so this is an important piece to just identify, because what this does reflect is when it is a board of trustees works effectively with the senior team and the staff of the organization, setting direction and then bringing it to life. It's certainly a wonderful demonstration of shared leadership come to life. So that said, I will pass it over. I think I see that Manager Rahim's camera is on. So I will go directly to Manager Rahim, who will share with us some highlights and open the space for trustees for comment and questions.
We actually won't go directly to Andrea Rahim because Andrea can barely speak. And so
okay.
as much as we'd love for her to highlight the report that she's done such an admirable job on, I'm going to start, and we're going to save her voice for 3 key pages and hope that she can get through those 3 key pages. So I would like to acknowledge Andrea's work. She's done a brilliant job pulling this together on behalf of the entire senior team, and thanks to everybody who has contributed to this, and hopefully it gives you the rich report that you need. And before I go further, I didn't have a chance at the end of the policy report to acknowledge the work of the policy team, and just did want to give a shout out to Nicole Guthrie and Angie Abdel Messiah and Susan Baker and Kenan Omerjakijic, our policy review team, who have done that such great work on that. And so on to this report. As the director indicated, this is the year 3 report on our strategic plan. And like our plan, which took a different approach, this kind of report takes a different approach. So we built a strategic plan on 3 culture statements: a culture of innovation, a caring, and social responsibility. And you're all too familiar with the timing. And we embarked on the rollout of this plan and didn't get too far in before we experienced COVID and a sort of upending of our planned priorities, or so we thought. What I will say, and what we tried to build into this report, is that you know, the advantage of a plan built on culture was agility, and also a clear set of values. And that was really important. We didn't anticipate the impact of the pandemic. We didn't anticipate some of the other world, both international, national, and local events that would happen over the course of this plan. But we made some real commitments to innovation, to a culture of caring, which included both, you know, the safety and care of students, but also the care and engagement of our employees, and, you know, a real drive for equity and human rights, and shining a lens on where we had opportunities for growth. And also on social responsibility, and really how we contribute to that positive sense of community, and how we fulfill our responsibilities in student learning and well-being. So with that in mind, you know, we look at this plan and what we've brought here, and we thought about reporting. And what we have tried to do in this document is really think about what have we done, what have we learned, and how do we know it made a difference. And so we talk a little bit about accomplishments, about the evidence of impact, about lessons learned, and areas for growth. We have not got, in this document, we've got lots of data. We don't have the kind of data we used to have in reporting. We don't have the annual student achievement results. We don't have some metrics that we used to use, but notwithstanding that, we've got a lot of great data that gets to both accomplishments and impact. And so I'm going to turn to Andrea and invite her to walk us through what is page 6 in the document, if you're following through the report itself, and talk to us a little bit about the culture of innovation. And then if her voice carries through, we'll get her to do very quickly all 3 culture statements. And if it doesn't carry through innovation, we'll pause there and I'll jump back in. So Andrea, over to you.
Thank you. I think after a few cups of tea, I'm hopeful that I can make my way through. I do apologize for the scratchiness in my voice, but I am excited to share this report with you. As interesting as it was to approach this report without the same kinds of data and metrics that we typically had for this report, we definitely embraced this as an opportunity to not just look at the data, but to really capture some of the stories. Because for this particular report, we really wanted to look at what feels different and how did the strategic plan impact the experiences of students, parents, guardians, and staff. So we're hopeful that we were able to capture that in this report today. When we think about building a culture of innovation, it's really about our goal to build a learning community where innovation and inquiry drive learning. And for innovation in particular, the pandemic definitely accelerated our work in many ways. When we think about the advancements that we've been able to make in technology, including the redesign of delivery models to support remote learning, the distribution of technology to students, the establishment of the Ottawa-Carleton virtual schools, and then from an organizational aspect as well, when we talk about the automation and the organizational efficiency through things such as electronic forms and business processes and the ways that we've been able to automate through technology there, we've been able to not just make gains in the planned initiatives, but also chart some new territory as well. When we think about innovation on the next page, we've also got some innovative practices that I really want to highlight. We've got dismantling barriers through de-streaming, really to serve students that we have data that shows that streaming has been underserving, such as students that identify as Indigenous, Black, racialized students, students from low-income households, students with disabilities, and students with other special education needs that we know from our data are overrepresented in applied and locally developed courses. And so really dismantling those barriers and de-streaming grade 9 and 10 courses being a big commitment from our district. When we think about innovation, I really encourage you, when you have the time, to click on that link for the Leap into Kindergarten Summer Learning Academy and some great work that's being done there for innovative practices to prepare students for kindergarten. And additional work being done around structured literacy and professional development for educators, and supporting credit accumulation through authentic learning experiences. If we look at that framework alone, we had over 900 credits last year earned by over 301 students who were identified as being at risk of disengaging from school. So when we talk about innovative practices really making a difference for students, that's a really good example of some work that's being done to look at student learning differently. So when we look at the next page, what we wanted to capture was that what feels different. We have quotes from students saying they feel more confident, they were able to learn more, and from teachers saying they were able to save time and resources through some of these automated processes. But as always, opportunities for growth as well. Some of the feedback we received from parents is the lack of consistency when we talk about digital tools. I'm sure that the multiple passwords we need to remember is something that we can all relate to, and that's the kind of thing that we're hearing from parents. So definitely some opportunities where we've already been making some gains to improve consistency there, but still some work to be done in that area. Our next culture statement focuses on a culture of caring, where our goal is to advance equity and a sense of belonging to promote a safe and caring community. We really wanted to focus on caring during COVID-19 because focusing on a culture of caring can always be challenging, but doing it while navigating the number of events that we've had to navigate over the past few years has been impacted our approach, but we have, notwithstanding, made progress on a number of the planned initiatives. such as the Commit to Kids programs, the Safe Schools policy, the online tool for students to report bullying. And as well, COVID really highlighted the need for continued work in the area of caring and well-being. And as much as it seems like during a pandemic is a really difficult time to be surveying and touching base with the community, we actually thought that was the most important time to be surveying and touching base with the community. So we did regular community check-ins with students, staff, and parents and guardians. And some of the highlights from those surveys are highlighted on page 9. And then based on that feedback, we were able to take action. So on page 10, you'll see some of the things that were done in response to the feedback we heard, such as well-being supports and resources and the establishment of a family and community engagement office. I'm going to skip ahead to page 11 just to talk about, again, what feels different. We had educators saying that they're starting to see where they fit in and that they're finally feeling heard and seen. We had students saying to continue to offer opportunities for connections. And we did get feedback again that there are things that we can be doing to improve. Some of those pieces of feedback include considering the heavy workload for educators and considering children's peer-to-peer relationships and how they may have suffered during COVID-19. So our third culture statement, building a culture of social responsibility to strengthen our community through ethical leadership, equitable practice, and responsible stewardship. Under this, we talk about stewardship of resources and making strategic investments, as well as budgeting with an equity lens. And the 2022-2023 budget included a summary of the equity positions, which was an important part of the budget process to highlight that work and be accounting for it in the budget moving forward. And we also have environmental stewardship. We've got the launch of the Sustainability Journal and some really incredible work that's happening in schools. So once again, I'll plug a link that's on this page at the bottom of page 13. But if you click that link, you can see some of the great initiatives that students are doing in schools and that have been shared with the community. On the next page, under social responsibility, an important focus of this work has really been centering equity and human rights. We have the Indigenous Equity and Human Rights Roadmap, the Human Rights Policy, the Equitable Hiring Policy, and of course, the redesigned policy review process. And again, what really strikes me is what feels different and what are we hearing in the words of the community. And on page 14, that top quote is the one that gets me the most. And we have an elementary educator saying, I'm going to continually ask myself, does my language reflect my values of equity? Does my language support all students making sense of the content? Does my language honor students' potential? And I just think that if these are the kinds of questions that our educators are asking themselves when they go into their classroom each day, then we know that we're making strides in building a culture of social responsibility. And we have other quotes from students saying they're beginning to claim all of their identities, they're reconnecting with their culture, they love exploring their identity. Again, just evidence of some of the great work that's been happening here. But once again, also opportunities for growth around the areas of teachers' professional development, as well as tangible support in helping BIPOC staff achieve leadership status, such as vice principal and principal. On page 15, we've got some overarching assessments of our progress so far. In the area of innovation, really learning to embrace change and take an innovative approach to student learning. And then the link that you'll see at the bottom of that red box takes you to some great stories in the words of students where you can hear what they had to say about their learning journey. Around a culture of innovation, again, really a focus here on the opportunities that have been created for stakeholder input and really trying to gather and actively listen to what the community has to say. And finally, under cultural responsibility, that bringing a human rights lens is definitely having an impact on our work, and that we're seeing the face of leadership in the OCDSB changing, and we're seeing a visible shift in student leaders as well. And once again, a great video where you can hear it directly from the students included in that page. And then this situates us really in thinking about our next strategic plan. And I'm going to pass it over to Executive Officer Drew to walk us through this final page. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrea, and great overview there. I think what I will just say in closing, as we reflect back over the last 3 years, it would have been easy just to talk about what went into the redesign of public education to navigate COVID. And I say that both in terms of the incredible work done by educators and education support workers and administrators in schools and in classrooms and in person and virtually and ping-ponging back and forth between them. It would have been easy to talk just about the administrative processes and how far we've come in terms of automating and responding to what we knew parents wanted was just faster, easier ways to fill out forms. But we wanted to make sure that, you know, we really set the context right to bring you back to where we were when we developed this plan. When we had the collection of identity-based data as a goal and not something we've done, when we, you know, talked about creating a human rights and equity policy, or at least even just having that lens, let alone bringing together the office and having the advisor. When we talked about equitable hiring as a both a direction and tangibly in a policy, and that doesn't even get into all of the pedagogy work in terms of improving the learning environment and the incredible mental health work and supports. So when we look at those I call them odometers, but those scales at the end about where we're coming, where we've come, it's just a tremendous amount of work behind this. And that's not to say that we don't have huge places to go. And this is year 3 in a 4-year plan. And it is also the time where we take pause and we say, you know, what did we do here that we did well? And, you know, will sustain itself and will help to move us forward. What is it that we're doing that we need to keep pushing hard on? And what did we hope to do that, you know, maybe we need to carry forward or maybe we need to let go of? And that's the what we hope we have shared with you tonight, or at least shared enough for thought. We're happy to take any questions. And also just a reminder that, you know, the next big piece of our work is the building the next plan, and your thoughts and reflections on where we're at in this work today will help to inform how we carry some of that forward. So thanks very much.
All right, okay, I just got back on my screen here, so going to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, and I would like to say a huge thank you to Executive Officer Giroux and Andrea and everybody else who has contributed to putting this report together. It's not that often that we have an overview that doesn't leave us dissatisfied that too many things were left out. But with all of the links in this particular document, it is easy to see that the highlights have been captured right on the top, and there is plenty more detail for us to explore and consider as we move forward into the current year. I do have one very specific question, and that is about the grade 10 math de-streaming, which is something that I think is not well understood, and I would really appreciate a quick comment on exactly where we are with that, because although one student is quoted as saying it's great to have the grade 10 math de-streamed, my understanding from other students is that that is not always the case. And so I would like to know where we are in actually implementing that de-streamed grade 10 math.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Certainly, that is a big shift for us from an instructional point of view. You know, I'm pleased to say that the superintendents of instruction and myself, just last week, I was in a couple of math classes. We're saying math now rather than D-streams because they're just math. And watching the students engage in such a different way is quite exciting. But we do recognize that change is change, and it is not what students are conditioned to expect. So we're certainly opening a new space. Superintendent Tuwage is anxious to share some feedback and some updates there. So I will turn it over to Superintendent Tuwage.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair. So the quote, which is important, it was one of many that we received from department heads across the district, was based on the experience of students from grade 9 de-streamed math. And these are students that are now enrolled in grade 10 de-streamed math. So we are 1 month into the rollout of grade 10 de-streamed math. What we were very clear about as a district was that there would be very little purpose of de-streaming grade 9 math if we didn't de-stream grade 10 math right away. And so we are one of the boards that is de-streaming. We right away partnered with the lead educational researcher in mathematics. We had an opportunity where we sent an interest opportunity for math teachers in grade 10 to work with us and to work cross-departmentally last year to prepare materials and support for our grade 10 math teachers. And I'm really proud to say, and we are going to be sharing the initial data from the outcomes for grade 9 de-streamed math. We are seeing a number of students who would have otherwise been in both locally developed or applied math. They are in grade 10 de-streamed math. And from a professional development perspective, we are working every single month with a team of 10 educators from every single high school for a full day, supporting all of our work around de-streamed courses. The reality is this is big work. We are de-streaming grade 10 math, grade 9 English, grade 9 French, grade 9 geography, and grade 9 science at the same time. And the only way we can do it successfully is if we have teams working together, because it is not an opportunity to maintain the status quo, because our status quo has underserved students.
Thank you very much for that. My sense is that there is some confusion, because I understand that the ministry has, since they haven't yet produced the total curriculum for the grade 10 de-streamed math, that they don't actually have a course code, a new course code for the grade 10 course. So all of our students are currently listed, I think, as registered in academic math. This is very confusing to some families, because they see, all they see is that it's academic math. And so in terms of that, what are we actually doing to make sure that the full range of students in grade 10 math in a single class is being supported? Are we having extra involvement, for example, from our learning support teachers, or are there other things that are happening? Are teachers getting training, teaching to that broader range of abilities and interests?
Through you, Chair. I caught most of what you said, Chair Scott, so I'm going to do my best with the response. What we learned from the lead board in the province, which of course is TDSB, one of our partner boards, is there are 3 consistent areas that we need to focus on. We need to focus on mindset of CRRP, culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. We need to be designing tasks through universal design for learning, so that all children have access, and we need to be focusing on differentiated instruction. So the reality is, the way all curriculum expectations are written, there are many ways to access that particular big idea. We can create tasks that open doors and provide entry for all children, or we can be designing tasks that are created where we then would have to differentiate afterwards. So our focus is on ensuring that the tasks that we create have an entry for all learners. And so that's the big PD that we worked on all of last year, where we had over 263 high school educators who wanted to be part of these teams. So we are in a very different situation from other districts because the people who actually designed the tasks are teaching the courses right now. We also added, as an additional support, we added 13 D-Stream teachers. So these are some of our educators who are teaching the course right now, and they are released for one section each of the 2 semesters, supporting other colleagues with implementation. So that's in addition to a full day every single month. We just had a full PA day on Friday. We have another PA day with our secondary colleagues on November 25th. And all of the folks at the table would include department heads, the principals, the LST, guidance head, and student success. So this is an ongoing piece, but every single month, all of the departments work together to create the professional learning. And the most important thing is when we looked at our additional data, and we'll have a memo to trustees shortly from grade 9 math, is we had a higher rate of success for the children who prior would have been in applied level courses or locally developed. And so that's a real positive step when we think of the groups of children that we've underserved.
Thank you. I'm not surprised that we're seeing better results from the students who were previously underserved in grade 9. However, I do think it would be helpful if we were able to put out some parent-friendly language on just what this actually means and how we're doing it. Because I think there are still a lot of questions in other people's minds about how this is really working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Oops, there we go. Thank you. I read it with quite a bit of interest. It's an important report, of course, and the last one on the strat plan for the outgoing board. Though obviously there's another year to go, and things have been greatly derailed by COVID. To me, I'll start by saying, but I do feel as if I need to say it, how truly impressed I am by all staff's efforts and work throughout COVID and before, though most of this term seems to have been about COVID, and working themselves, indeed overworking themselves at the end of the day on behalf of students. And that shows in the report. However, when I, perhaps being a bit pointy-headed, when I look at our actual strat plan document, which lists certain outcomes, and this report is an outcomes report, increased graduation success in all pathways. I didn't really see anything that necessarily talked directly to that. The de-streaming presumably can be supposed to help. Certain other initiatives can be supposed to help. I'm not saying that they don't, but perhaps in future reports we have more of a direct tie to what was set out in the strat plan so that people could maybe connect the dots better. Just a suggestion going forward. The other thing, and of course, the next year will be the last year, and presumably there will be some kind of summary along those lines, hopefully. The other thing is it's very difficult to judge how good or bad or relevant some of the facts are. So, 35 parents participated in the LEAP program, which may be amazing, or it could be so-so. I have no way to judge. It's really just a fact, right? How many parents, what's our target for parent participation? Do we have one? So I get just ideas perhaps for staff for next year's report, which will be a summary one. And in terms of maybe the discussions that will perhaps be had with the new board around how to frame the new 4-year strategic plan and what kinds of considerations around metrics and other that should be put into it. But again, I want to thank staff for not just the report, but all of their work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. Moving on to Brian Lesage.
Good evening, everyone. Brian Lesage, elementary teachers. Through you, Chair, I wonder if there is an appreciation of, a recognition of some of the numbers and the data that are behind this report around engagement and feeling feeling that they have a part of, they have a stake in what's going on in the board, and how these numbers show very low numbers among some of the board's employee groups. Specifically, elementary teachers had a very low number of feeling engaged and supported when compared to other employee groups. Has there been any work done or study into why that is the case? And most importantly, has there been any thought into what the district is going to do to improve those numbers, to make teachers, educators feel supported, respected, and listened to? Because I would suggest that the best plans of the district will not be fulfilled unless the people who are closest to students every day in classes feel engaged, feel supported. I heard a statement made tonight that someone said, one of the stakeholders reported, I feel heard and seen. I don't think the numbers show that. I don't think what we hear from our members reflect that. So has there been any thought into why those numbers are so low, what's caused that, and what the board can do to address it?
Through you, Chair, I'll start my response to that. I'm not sure if Superintendent Hall is still with us, who might want to engage. Certainly, I appreciate Mr. Lesage's comments, because he is quite right that the outcomes that we see at the desks of students are very much a result of the engagement, the input, the imagination, the commitment of educators. And when I say educators, I will go as far as to say we have our teachers, our education assistants, our ECEs who are in the rooms with students, moving those pieces along. And so that engagement is an important piece. And we did, in fact, undertake last year an employee engagement and equity survey. And certainly there were many areas where we see an improvement is required. And so when you ask Mr. Lesage the question about what it is that we intend to do, we have looked at that data and do recognize that there are steps that need to be undertaken. One of the things that we recognize as a part of that survey, and it's reflected in the report, is a disconnect that our teams feel with the senior team, with the direction of strategic planning, strategic direction, and how it is that they see themselves. That is a priority to undertake to correct, because again, we are a leadership group that is a part of the work. And so one of the things we've already undertaken is how it is that we create opportunities, time, and direction for the senior team to be present, to show up, to be in classrooms, to be in schools, to hear from those people who are in front of our students and understand how it is that we make adjustments with that feedback. I have participated in some of the some aspects of the professional learning that was just discussed from Superintendent Tuwage. And the structures that are created in a manner that engage the educators who are in front of children to inform some best practices or practices that we need to undertake. And this is something we need to expand and grow so that the educators who are in front of our children do see their ideas reflected and see their realities reflected. Can we solve every problem? No, we can't. But what we can do is we certainly can hear and build from the perspectives that are shared. But in order to build from and hear the perspectives that are shared, we recognize we need to show up. And I certainly have undertaken that seriously with every attempt to show up in a classroom at least once a week. And I know that the senior team, they are in classrooms more regularly than I am, but showing up is a key part of making that connection and then building forward from what we hear and what we learn when we show up. So the answer to your question about whether or not we have heard and whether or not we're planning to respond is yes, we definitely do. And we agree that it is in fact the educators who are on the ground with our children who are yielding the results that we want to see for the kids that we serve every day.
Thank you very much. And seeing no further hands up, I'd like to say thank you very much, Executive Officer, for that report, and also to Andrea, and I hope your voice gets better. Moving on to report from OPSPA, Trustee Jenkins.
Hi there. Thanks, Chair Penny. I'll just give a highlight of the things we discussed. Regional update. Of course, we spoke about the concerns about the continued shortage of school bus drivers. A reminder that the upcoming public education symposium will be in January, January 28th, 2023. And they anticipate a large number of brand new trustees at the PES, and the theme of PES will be optimism and opportunity. We also discussed the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and OPSPA has some learning modules that have been developed on Indigenous learning for trustees, which are now available. We talked about the upcoming municipal election, and OPSPA has information explaining what the role of trustees is and the importance of diversity and inclusion. And then update on OPSPA activities. They are continuing to examine the shortage of teachers of French as a second language. And they're also looking for examples of best practices in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And they're also planning on putting together a white paper on mental health issues. And I'll share with trustees a written document with those highlights.
Thank you very much, Trustee Jenkins. And is there any questions for Trustee Jenkins on her report or on OPSPA? Suzanne Lyon?
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Trustee Jenkins. I was wondering if you might be able to take an issue back to OPSPA, which I was very much interested in your comments on the educational material available for National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And I just went quickly to the website where it talks about some of the calls to action. So I wonder if OPSPA might be willing to put out some kind of information or communique about the calls to action specifically that relate to education and where they're at, or perhaps for the OCDSB, where we're at with progress on those calls to action. I think that's something that parents would be very interested, and I would be very interested in it. Thank you.
Absolutely. I can certainly, if I'm the next member of OPSPA, I'll certainly present that at the next meeting. Otherwise, definitely share it with the next directors. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And seeing no further hands up for Trustee Jenkins, moving on our agenda to OSTA update, I'd like to call upon Trustee Blackburn to provide an update if there is any.
I have no update, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And is there any new business information or inquiries? Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you. I do have a question regarding the recent reorganization of classes. There are certainly a number of school classes that the classes have changed due to lack of student enrollment. Can someone just provide a little bit more information on how the board came to that decision and what sort of support is offered to students and their families through this reorganization?
Thank you, Trustee Jenkins. I will call on Superintendent Hall to respond to the question.
Thank you for the question. So the trustee is correct. We did have quite a few adjustments, actually more than I think in recent history in the elementary staffing. And with that, it's not just, I guess, on the side of reductions, but there were increases. So depending on the school, there may have been changes to class sizes and the requisite reorgs for those particular classes, while others had the opposite experience. So, you know, it would be specific to the school and what changes would have had to been adjusted or reorged. Again, they were limited as much as possible. And certainly, you know, when we look at kindergarten, for example, we did see a jump in classes from 363 in 2021 up to 375, and that's to date. One of the caveats I would say is that, you know, enrollment, at least last year, continued to increase in the elementary panel. But the elementary staffing committee was very reluctant to make any reductions, for example, to kindergarten classes. And that was due to the socialization concerns for our youngest students and the experiences they've had over the past couple of years. And at that level, there was only one reduction at one particular school. And that reduction still left the class class cap or the student numbers below the class cap. So again, we really tried to minimize these impacts. We do acknowledge that this year it was more significant across the elementary panel in terms of those revisions. And of course, we know that's based on a number of reasons. And we have at least through people, culture, and leadership and through our human resources services been providing schools with as much support as we can and offering them, for example, suggested reorganizations that would have the least impact on the least number of students. So those are the types of things we have been doing to try to address this and again, make the changes up front so we don't have to look at, you know, other pressures or changes throughout the school year so students can settle in and get to learning. We expect these changes to be over shortly, as we know. We're closing in on the final timelines for all staffing and we expect that October 13th will kind of be the final date for class size adjustments to be completed. So that should happen very soon.
Thank you, Superintendent Hall. I know certain parents, in particular at Steve McLean Elementary School, public school, the grade 7 classes, they've been reorganized. One class has been dropped, so consolidating 3 classes into 2, which brings the class size up to, potentially 30. So there's a lot of stress now on students at that particular school. And I know Trustee Scott and I have both received messages in regards to Manotick Public School. The grade 2 classes, there has been a change. So parents are really struggling students are struggling with the reorganization. And will the district be sending out a communique though to families shortly with the final information?
So thank you, through you, Chair. We typically, I believe anyway, our practice is to, on a school-by-school basis, to be sharing specific information related to a particular school or site through the principal of that school. Trustees will receive a communication about both secondary and elementary staffing, so you can have a better sense of how things have evolved this year and some of the changes that we've seen. And I would encourage parents always to contact the principal if they do have questions about these changes. And I know our principals are very, very mindful over trying to mitigate, these situations. They are not ideal, but they do happen. They happen every year. And one of the areas of, particular attention is always schools, trying to be as supportive as we can to schools who do have students who are maybe particularly vulnerable, or communities or schools such as those that are higher on the RAISE index, so we do try to be mindful of those particular situations, but we do know other schools and communities are impacted based on some of these reorganization decisions. So hopefully that gets at your question. And if you have any others, certainly offline, Trustee Jenkins, I'm happy to have a chat with you.
Thank you, Superintendent. And Chair Penny, I do have another question of another topic.
Go ahead.
Castor Valley recently had organized a touch football tournament, which sadly was canceled due to the changes in scheduling. And so by the time they were able to choose a new date for the new tournament, it would be well into November, where the field wouldn't be safe for students. Can staff provide just a little bit of background how these tournaments are organized and why this particular tournament was canceled last minute? I know a number of students and families were disappointed in the cancellation.
Through you, Chair, I'll direct the question to AD Reynolds.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I certainly invite Superintendent Tawage to add anything to this conversation, as she's been working very hard with a team of principals and others to reorganize and rethink somewhat elementary athletics. We will be running elementary athletics this year. We made it a real priority, but we had to be mindful of some of the staffing shortages that we've already begun to encounter, and we certainly don't want to see classes or schools unduly impacted as these events draw more teachers, more staff out of schools. So they've done a lot of creative thinking to see how we can run the sports that we typically run throughout the year in a way that minimizes the impact on the operations of the schools and allows the students who are back in school to be there with a teacher and continue to learn while the athletes are out participating. So with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Tawage to talk a little bit about how they are accomplishing that over the course of the year. And then we might want to ask Superintendent Lehman if he's aware of what particularly happened at Castor Valley, because that's somewhat outside of the district direction.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to give more information to Trustee Jenkins, and I wanted to start off by saying that we are extremely supportive of elementary athletics. And if we think about always about the whole child, we have rising obesity rates of youth across Canada. We have an increase in sedentary patterns that came through in all youth across Canada during the pandemic. So I wanted to first say we are highly, highly committed to physical activity and health. And that comes through a number of areas. It comes through a high quality physical education program. It comes from daily physical activity. It comes from a rich and inclusive intramural school-based program. And additionally, it is supported through an athletics program. So a couple of important things to be aware of. The last time that we would have had a full year of elementary athletics would have been in the 2018-2019 school year. And a number of the practices that we were able to do in that year compared to the 2022-23 school year are very different. Our OT shortages have significantly increased. In addition to our access to buses. You can imagine at elementary, having buses to take teams to sports are really important. So I really wanted to talk about how we are working together, and it addresses a little bit of the question from Mr. Lesage earlier. We have not come up with a solution as a senior team. The first thing we did is we partnered with the elementary teachers who serve on the athletics executive. So both the junior executive and the intermediate executive have been part of our mini working group for elementary athletics, in addition to the collaborative table for athletics that AD Reynolds talked about earlier, that also has principals and vice principal voice on there. So through huge creativity by these teacher leaders, we actually have been able to put together a year-long program that actually is equitable and that can be operationalized, because what we want to do more than anything, Trustee Jenkins, is we want to avoid the situation at all costs that we have a team of children that arrive on a given morning ready to go to a tournament, and the principal has to say, I'm really sorry, we don't have enough OTs, we're not going to be able to go. So we have 16 tournaments that start tomorrow. We prioritize the most inclusive first event, which is cross country. Every child that tries out gets to be on the team. So we have 16 days of cross-country tournaments beginning tomorrow at junior and intermediate, starting with grade 3 right through grade 8. Our next sport at intermediate is, once we conclude cross-country, is football. And we have sports throughout the year. So highly collaborative with this executive team. And we have communicated that to our principals, and our principals are able to communicate that to their school communities. It won't look exactly the same, absolutely, but what I can tell you is that it will be equitable. There'll be a high level of access, and it involves 3 pieces. Physical education, that's part of all of our programming, high quality, inclusive intramurals, and regional tournaments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So you mentioned busing, which is, yes, absolutely an ongoing challenge. Does the board provide parents the opportunity to drive students to tournaments, or is there the safety factor there where, you know, concern for parents driving other students? Do we offer that ability? And also, do we work with the city to you know, for other options for other fields, because there seems to be a shortage of fields perhaps that play in this challenge operationally. Do we work with the city to rent other field space?
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to jump in here. We haven't done anything in isolation. We partnered with OSTA right off the bat. We shared our tentative dates. We've been working with all of the school superintendents around access to secondary fields as well, because we're not limited to city fields. So we have been partnering with all of those groups brilliantly. So the timing of our events is really driven by when we have access to busing. And through the huge creativity of these teacher leads that we've partnered with, they have worked through ways that we can run these events. So I can assure you, we are doing huge work, collaborative work with our partners in the city, with our secondary principals for access to fields. And we're really thankful and fortunate to be working with these teacher leaders.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trustee Jenkins. Moving on to Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, I believe this is our last meeting before the election. I know that we do have one more on November 1st. But I just simply wanted to wish colleagues that are running for re-election good luck on the 24th. And want to just, I'll reserve my comments to staff and outgoing trustees until hopefully we get a chance to see you all in person. But that was all I wanted to simply say. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Trustee Schwartz. Moving on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you. Trustee Jenkins raised two topics, for which I have a couple of follow-up questions. With regard to the reorganizations that are being done, it's always disruptive to students, whether a teacher is being added and more classes are created, or whether a teacher is lost and classes are being combined, because the kids have to get used to different classmates and they also have to get used to a different teacher in many cases. So I guess the question is, what specific kinds of supports are we providing in the different schools to help the students through this transition, particularly the ones who are the youngest students who may have the greatest difficulty?
So I think I will turn the question to Superintendent Tuwage.
Through you, Chair, I apologize. I did get a bit of a disconnection with my audio, so I did not hear the entire question.
What supports are we providing specifically to our youngest students, but to any of the students who are being impacted, particularly by changes of teachers that come about, whether classes are being added or whether classes are being combined?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The reality is that there is huge thought that goes into class placements, both in terms of the initial class placements, and then when we do have reorganizations, whether it's a group of 4 children that are impacted or an entire class. So what would happen is all of the educators who teach these children, including the teachers who would have taught them the year before, would all be part of the decisions around which groupings of children, which children together from a social perspective, from an academic perspective, would move to another classroom. We always look at the teacher relationships. We look at trying to do the changes as quickly as possible. It may seem counterintuitive, but the reality is, dragging out or having changes go over a long period of time, right, doesn't give the opportunity for those children to have an opportunity to meet with the teachers. What would typically happen, you would have an opportunity for the children to meet who their new educator would be prior to the first day. There'd be communication from the new teacher to the parents of the impacted children along with the principal. But what I can tell you is that we have changes every single year. I've experienced them as a parent, I've experienced them as an educator, I've experienced them as a principal. And the reality is it takes a real short period of time for the children to make new friendships. Our educators are extremely skilled in creating opportunities for a class and opportunities for engaging tasks and for relationship building. building. So it may feel really, really challenging at the start, especially if you're the parent of one of the small children, whether the child is in grade 1 or in grade 8. But the reality is that we have extremely skilled educators, and I know that Mr. Lesage would agree to that. They are very, very talented, and they put the well-being of children at their heart with any of these moves.
Thank you very much for that. And that don't go away, because I'm on to my next question, which relates to the athletics programs. And that is that I'm hearing from parents at some schools that they're not seeing very much evidence of the athletic tournaments and so on. Particularly, they are anxious to know about cross country. So in terms of the plan that you and your team of elementary teachers have been working on, will that involve all of our schools, or are we still looking at situations where a school might not have any teacher volunteer to supervise a particular athletic activity?
Through you, Chair. The reality is cross country is probably the single largest athletics opportunity at elementary. I can tell you that I am not aware of any school that does not have a cross-country team. The reality is, as with all of these activities, these are extracurricular. They do take educators, whether they are teachers, whether they're ECEs or EAs that volunteer. But we have a very, very high percentage of children that participate at each school. And like I said, we have 16 tournaments that start tomorrow. So we have 6 regions at the intermediate level. So all of the 50 plus schools that have grades 7 and 8 will be on one of those 6 days. And we have 10 regions at the junior level, and most of the regions do include grade 3 for cross country. Obviously, our youngest ones are looking at about 1 kilometer. They're not doing the long races, but again, if we have any questions from parents, they can contact the school directly, and they'll be able to get more information. But cross country will take the entire month of October, and that's really important. We are not running events on Mondays and Fridays. From an OT challenge, we would be setting ourselves up, and we would be risking disappointing children that would be going on those days. The other piece I did want to mention to Trustee Jenikins' earlier question, for our smaller teams, we always do count on the support of parent drivers. Our cross-country teams are typically extremely large, so we book our buses for that. But we also, in some of our school communities, parent drivers are not an opportunity. So we want to make sure, from an equity standpoint, that we would have that we create events at times where we've got access to buses for those children to be able to have access.
Thank you very much for that. I'm delighted to hear about the cross country.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. Moving on to Suzanne Lyon.
Yeah. Thank you. And through you, Chair, I wanted to comment on Trustee Jenikins' question about transportation to sporting events. And as a longtime chair of a parent council who did a lot of fundraising for this very reason, in a small school with a great deal of socioeconomic challenges, we often, when we had money, would use it to pay for buses for students to attend sports and arts and culture events. And in fact, that was our biggest expenditure over the 6 years that I was the chair of that parent council at Century Public School, which is now closed. But there are several options. I know that OSTA has challenges with drivers, so you may not be able to find extra buses from OSTA. OC Transpo was an option for us. And the Education Foundation also has a budget line for supporting student involvement in active living, sports, arts, and culture opportunities. And they were very helpful in the past as well. So there may be some ideas there for you to take back to people in your district and for other trustees as well. it helped us a lot. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Pat Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I would like to take a moment to address the notion of occasional teachers not being available. I am the president of the elementary occasional teachers, and I think you need to be aware of why elementary occasional teachers are not available. They do not feel well treated in this board. Surveys support that as well. When it was spoken earlier tonight about the staff that help and support and do good in the schools, OTs weren't mentioned. It's not the first time. It's common. We have over 1,900 OTs on our list right now. Those are what we call active OTs, and that they are not OTs who have not worked 20 assignments or less in the last year. There are no incentives for OTs to work for this board. They're the lowest paid in the province. They do not get respect. Allegations are rife. There is no discipline support. There is no support for violence. So please don't blame OTs for things that can't be accomplished. You need to look elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Penny. I just had one other comment that I wanted to share. There still continues to be a lot of traffic concerns around certain schools in my community. Of course, Vimy Ridge continues to have challenges based on their overcrowding, and certainly Steve McLean as well is experiencing higher traffic challenges. And also they're not respecting the safety patrollers as well. So there's certainly concerns that drivers are not respecting the speed limits, the safety patrollers, and not respecting other parents during the drop-off and pickup times. I think it's important that we work with our city councilor, I guess, after the municipal election. And I think we need to consider as well here in Riverside South, we're going to be building a new high school, and the speed limit along the main street that the high school will be built is high, is excessive. And hopefully we'll be addressing these concerns as we, as we start, as those new schools are being built. But I did want to raise and highlight the challenges facing a number of the schools with the traffic and the disrespect that parents and drivers are not treating safety patrollers.
Thank you, Trustee Jenkins. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to pick up on the issue that Trustee Jenkins just raised. I have the exact same issues here in Barrhaven. My constituents are parents, families, grandparents are very concerned about the issues in and around our schools around traffic. And with all due respect, a call to the city councilor is it's helpful to talk to your city councilors, and I do that on a regular basis. However, the enforcement of these laws and rules is up to the Ottawa Police Service. Our principals, if they have concerns regarding traffic in and around their schools, rolling stop signs, speed limits, illegal U-turns, the list goes on, are they allowed to reach out to the Ottawa Police and ask for their assistance?
Through you, Chair, certainly our principals will reach out to get support from a number of resources, including but not limited to police partners. And so certainly where it is that we can get advice or support may be helpful. I don't know if us AD Reynolds might have something further to add, but certainly there's nothing that precludes our principals from seeking advice or insight or direction. Whether or not police will actually be situated on site is a whole different question. But I think that that is a part of the partnership that we have with some of our community partners, like our police services, to help us and guide us in what are some of the resources available to address safety on our school premises. AD Reynolds, did you have a further comment on that?
Principals are still free to reach out to Ottawa Police when they see crimes in progress in the community or safety hazards in the community. For example, dangerous driving, things of that nature. So certainly, or strangers in the vicinity is another example. So certainly principals are still encouraged to reach out and report those things to Ottawa Police. We've only asked that they consult with their SOI when it's a non-mandatory report item pertaining to students or student activity. So vehicular traffic concerns can still be reported. OSTA can also be a valuable asset in terms of working with the city to find other avenues to perhaps make things more safe for pedestrians and identifying walking hazards and coming up with solutions as well.
May I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair, please?
Yes.
So in the past, principals had a point of contact within the Ottawa Police Service. What is the situation now? So in the past, they would call their SRO and the SRO would respond to them probably in a timely manner because that was their job. What is the process now?
So through your chair, depending on the urgency, if there's dangerous driving, perhaps happening at the moment, it could still, depending on the severity, it could still be a 911 call. If it doesn't reach that threshold of posing an immediate risk, then it would be a typical report through the reporting line to Ottawa Police that any community member could engage in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on that one additional clarification, I thought it was mostly the bylaw people who were engaged in managing traffic and parking and other things like that around our schools. Are they accessed in the same way as we would access police services?
So through your chair, certainly bylaw does play a role in terms of parking enforcement or parking and fire lane enforcement. If it comes to not respecting crossing guards, running through intersections or things of that nature, that would still be Ottawa Police as a Highway Traffic Act infringement. Bylaw is accessed as it's always been accessed through 311 or contacting the city.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you very much. And seeing no further questions or inquiries, we come to the end of our agenda. I'd like to say thank you everyone for hanging in there till 10:21, and everyone have a good evening, and we'll see you. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.